Good morning, everybody, and from my side, thank you to Safripol for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here and to present. And I must say, it's not the easiest topic that I've got. So yeah, let's see how we deal with that. I'm very happy that the DDG spoke before me. I think she raised a number of issues and created the context. So it makes it easier for me. I'm not going to deal with all the issues of the Global Plastics Treaty. I will focus on a few and just try to create the context of what's currently happening. I must say this is quite a fluid and a dynamic environment at the moment. As the DDG said, on Monday we received a new document from the chairperson shared with us following a long zero draft that we had before. And the question is, you know, there's constantly new information and issues that you need to deal with. So some stay constant and others continuously change. And how do you keep track of that? I'm not going to cover through all the various topics that's on my list. You can see what I would like to deal with. So as I said, I will not be able to cover in the time that I have all the different elements that is very often contentious at this point of time. Plastics SA have joined forces with CAIA, the Chemical Allied Industry Association locally, to deal with the plastics treaty and the discussions. Globally, we've taken hands with the global industry, where we work with the International Council for Chemical Associations, the American Chemical Council, who've created a plastics leadership group that really incorporates most of the associations and bodies and producers worldwide. So we're quite connected. We've engaged with them from a global perspective, but very critical is how do we bring the South African context in, and specifically when you start dealing with the National Action Plan later on in the process. We're also working closely with the International Chamber of Commerce, so we have that link internationally as well. Part of this group, we have the global partners for plastic circularity. You can look at that website if you want more detail on developments and progress and the vision and etc. that's in place. But I think critical for us and for me just to restate is that the goal at the end of the day for us, it's about eliminating plastic pollution while retaining the societal benefits of plastic. And I think it's critical that you keep that in the back of your minds. So just to create context, where does South Africa and maybe Africa sit in this whole process of the Global Plastics Treaty? And if you look at the box diagram on the left-hand side of your slide, you can see China is producing about 32% of raw materials, of polymers in South Africa, plastic. And then towards, on the right-hand side of that graph, you have, now I've lost the place. Middle East and Africa, sorry, the light blue bar, 9% in total. Africa itself is not probably even 1% of that. If you look at South Africa, we're only producing, in terms of the world production, 0.4% of the world production that's been created. So it's tiny in terms of the world consumption. But if you compare that to Africa, South Africa is one of the bigger plastic producers in Africa, or the biggest. We're the biggest economy as well. So also keep in mind is that plastic is really integrated with every economic sector of our economy. So we deal with, or our products, be it an intermediate product or a finished good, it goes into the market in every sector, be it communication, automotive, be it electrical, wherever you're looking at it. And it's like you say, Leanne, you touch plastics every moment of the day. So plastics form a critical backbone of the economy in South Africa. And any decision taking on a global level, dictating to South Africa what we need to do and how we need to do it, will have a bigger impact on our economy. And Rolf explained to us that our economy is not really in a good space. There's signs of growth probably, but any negative impact at the end of the day will have huge impacts in terms of the industry. Just very briefly, we talk recycling, and I just want to reflect what we are doing. And those that have international figures, you can compare this to what you know. But in 2023, the survey that we've done, recycling have grown by 17% in South Africa. We have collected waste that is predominantly coming from landfills, more than 53% of what is available for recycling in South Africa. And we have recycled, sorry, now I'm going all the way, and we've recycled around 27%, which compared to the rest of the world is a big number. Rest of the world, you're talking 9 to 12% that's been recycled. Given the fact that in South Africa we still sit with a broken waste management system, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Resolution 5.14. I think it's critical to take note that the instrument or the resolution that was adopted was to find a binding instrument on plastic pollution. So that was the main focus, and the focus was in the marine environment. It has broadened. DDG has spoke about chemicals of concern and polymers and all sorts of other things that's been in the process and in the mix of the discussion at the moment. And even the full life cycle, that's part of been in the resolution. We don't even have a full definition of that, because where does it start and where does it stop, and what do we mean by that? So it's been added to that, the binding and voluntary approaches, be it on a global level, on a national level. Is it binding, address the full life cycle of plastics, and then very well included there is the national circumstances. So very critical is that when you look at the decisions taken, how will it impact on individual countries, and what will be the impact of that. I'm not going around that a little bit more, maybe just on the context of the negotiations, what's happening there. 175 countries sitting there negotiating. It is the governments that negotiate, so it's not industry, it's not NGOs, it's not the scientists. We're sitting and attending as observers. Very often we don't have the opportunity to speak in the forum or in the meeting. When there are opportunity to speak, very often it would be those NGOs aligned to the UNEP or that's working for UNEP that will have the opportunity to speak. So industry have to deal with inter or bilateral discussions and meetings with members, need to work with side events, submit position papers and comments and things like that. So it's very much a one-on-one discussion rather than having a voice in the bigger arena. Very clear is that there's a clear global north and a global south that's emerging in these sort of discussions. Global north is typically more your economically developed countries, and global south is more your developing countries, and the impact is, or the fear is, what will be discussed and agreed, who has the voice, and what will be the impact on the developing countries at the end of the day. And we might end up with binding agreements that is not in the interest of South Africa specifically. General observations of the discussions is that, and I'm not going to read through that, One thing is that the negotiators are saying, the government negotiators, that this is a much more complex process than what they had to deal with before. It's where other treaties taking 10, 15 years to be developed. This one has a 2-year timeline. So it's very fast and it's very quick, but they're also dealing with a very complex topic that they need to have a decision on, and they agree that they have difficulty in getting their minds around plastics as a material. I think one of the big challenges is the capacity. I think industry have capacity to assist and to help with some of the discussions. I don't always think that these are fully utilized and used. Just on polymers of concern, as we heard, the chair has now moved that, or the primary polymers, to just apply. We've looked at definitions that reflect on life cycle, which has not been even agreed to or finalized. So polymers of concern, and I use the polymers of concern as the text or the way that has been dealt with in the zero draft. Question is, what does it mean and how do we deal with that? And when is a polymer of concern? And very often it's related to chemicals that's been used in the production, be it the primary material or then the final products, intermediate goods. And one thing I can state is that in South Africa, the local producers of polymers follow very strict international standards around, or chemical standards, chemical management standards. So we can safely say that the material that we put on the market is not hazardous, it's not of concern. And those chemicals that are used in it is encapsulated in the material and does not have a risk as such. We would like to see that all imported materials that's coming into the country will meet the same criteria and that they can state that they comply with the same standards. I think one of the questions or the challenges that we have in South Africa is that we don't have a policy that regulate hazardous chemicals or chemicals then as such. Production caps is suggested. There are positions put forward that we need to reduce the production of polymers by 40% by 2040. Can you imagine what that will do to our economy, to job losses, to companies? So it is an issue that is under discussion. Obviously, there's huge divergence on this topic, and there's many countries that say this is not on the table, it should not be on the table as part of this discussion as we deal with pollution. Often the problematic and unnecessary or avoidable plastics has been raised as a discussion point. Yeah, the debate is who holds the decision, who makes the call at the end of the day that the material is avoidable or that it is hazardous or unnecessary. So it's still issues that needs to be finalized and definitions and processes that needs to be sorted out. Alternatives. So the view is that if one talk about alternatives, should it come into play, that those alternatives should have and should be measured against the same criteria that you measure plastics against, to say it's avoidable or unnecessary and so on. And then obviously, what is the socio-economic impact? What is the environmental impact at the end of the day of the material that you are bringing in? Chemicals of concern, that's another term that's in the zero draft. And again, many countries is of the notion that it should not be part of the text and it should not be included. After 13,000, and I think the DDG have shown that in the first slide, there's 13,000 chemicals that's been quoted to have an impact or that's hazardous, used in plastics. Interesting that more than 87% of those chemicals are somewhere regulated in one of the multilateral environmental agreements. So it's already been taken care of. But critical to note is that the global industry is busy with a additives database that will be developed over the next 3 years that would be very useful when making these sort of decisions. I refer to the MEAs, the multilateral environmental agreements. I think it's critical that this treaty would not duplicate the work that's been done in some others. So if there are gaps in those treaties or agreements, then I think it's critical that we fill those gaps instead of creating another one with another set of rules and criteria that is just confusing everybody at the end of the day. Risk-based approach and definitions. There's some of the scientists that would like to follow a hazardous approach in identifying chemicals of concern or polymers of concern. It's like saying there's a shark in the ocean, and because there's a shark, we're not going to swim. Risk-based and application-based really say, yes, we know there's a shark in the ocean, and we are aware of that. Therefore, we put out shark spotters and flags, and when we swim, we don't swim alone, because at least you reduce your chance by 50% to be killed. But you manage the risk at the end of the day, and I think the same should apply here. Interesting that none of the multilateral agreements that's been reached up to now have used the hazardous approach. But it is something that's been put on the table and that has a big impact on this. Lack of definitions, again, I think in the previous presentation is very clear, is that we had 4 sessions of negotiations and we don't have agreed definitions. So we're really arguing in a vacuum of fuzziness. We talk about things and everybody interprets it in a different way. And we really, yeah, that's probably something that should have been agreed before. It doesn't mean there's no definitions. It's nothing that has been debated, discussed, and agreed in line with the treaty that we're busy formulating. And yeah, there's a lot of definitions that's put on the table just to support those specific positions or individuals' positions, and it's not necessarily in the interests of global. Plastic circular economy, I would like to add that I think it's something that's critical that we need to look at when we're considering the treaty. We are dealing with plastic pollution at the end of the day, and how do we ensure that right through the value chain, the circular economy, we keep the material active, we keep the material alive within the circular economy, and ensure that whatever we do, that we keep the end of life in mind, and that we deal with that, and therefore find solutions to deal with that. And some of the ideas is that we really need to look at toolkits that will assist countries to embark on the circular economy to ensure that that is in place. And then obviously transparent and quality data will always be critical in any structure that has been implemented. Just keep my eye on the time here, and so I'll try to keep to that. Funding. Funding is a major issue, and the question is, at the end of the day, where is the funding coming from, and who will pay for that? And very often the first reaction, oh, we need the industry to pay for that, because they're the polluters. But there are different ways of dealing with that, and we're not necessarily throwing the waste out of the car window or in the street. So it's critical that if there is going to be funding, that you need to decide how that will be dealt with. All the other MEAs have funding mechanisms, so clearly this should probably be a dedicated fund, a separate thing, and then there need to be very clear criteria in place of how do you manage that. Good governance structures, clear understanding of what's the scope and what the money will be used for. What is the local circumstances and how you take that into account. And then most of all, we have a plastic bag levy which is not ring-fenced. That money was intended to come back to the industry to fix the waste issue around plastic bags, which is not happening. It's going into the fiscus. So it's clear that should there be a fund, that is ring-fenced. Also critical is that what happens to that money? If it's collected, does it go to a central body, whoever that might be? And do they then decide where that money is then best applied and allocated to? Different to the EPR fee, which is locally collected and used for the local conditions. But how would the international fund work, and who will be in control of that? There was been the talk about a position of $60 to $90 per ton added as a virgin fee. What will happen to that money? Where will it be used? And what is the impact on that socioeconomically in South Africa? So we're not in favor of any additional taxes. We say we should rather look at incentives to make and subsidies to make sure that we have a circular economy and that we drive it through that, reducing polymer waste or pollution at the end of the day. National action plans are reflected to that in the beginning. It's critical that we do have a national action plan that consider the South African conditions, have our own timelines and targets. This is where collaboration will be critical, is that we will have to sit around a table and agree on these things and make sure that we do ensure that what we put on the table at the end of the day is workable. One of the key things in South Africa would be our waste management systems and infrastructure. 39% of our population don't have access to waste management. They have nobody coming to collect their waste. So at the end of the day, what happens to that? We talked about open burning and things. So we need to fix our broken system. We need to make sure that in implementing a treaty like this, that we ensure that we get the waste out of the waste stream, not contaminated and from a landfill, but from a central place where it can be separated and sourced. We also need to look differently to the whole system that we use currently and move away from we're picking because there's a value to this material to an area where I sort the waste because that's the right thing to do. And eventually, by sorting all the waste that's available, you will deal with the financial impact for the waste pickers as well. Education awareness, I think we can't talk enough around that, and we definitely need a lot of support for a just transition. So how do we find and develop a system where you incorporate the informal sector, but ensure that you collect all waste and you sort all waste, not just the valuables? Last slide, DDG referred to the last sessions coming up, 60 hours of negotiations. If you look at what's on the list, there's more than 3,700 brackets on a 70-page document. It means it's more brackets than letters or words on there. It needs to be sorted out. It needs to be agreed. And 60 hours is definitely not sufficient for that. But there's a high expectation that there will be agreement reached. Although the question is, do we make it very broad? Might not have sufficient time then, or do we narrow down the scope and say, how do we deal with what we have currently, where there is convergence, and we can agree on some things and move forward in that. Critical is that, collaboration, we need to work together, industry needs to be part of this process, and at the end of the day, we need an effective and a workable agreement and a treaty that will eliminate waste, plastic waste, that will stop leakage of plastic into our environment and have a clean and healthy environment for the future. Thank you very much. Last slide, you can just check that. Bit of a challenge, but plastic, at the end of the day, if we deal with it, if we reuse it, recycle it, refill it, whatever the case might be, but if you use it from an environmental perspective, it's the best material to be used from a carbon footprint and other measures as well. So plastics is fit for purpose, but it doesn't belong in the environment And this is what the treaty needs to stop. Thank you.